Most horrible evening out there, or certainly had been during the day, all lovely and warm and dry here in the library tonight. So just a little bit of housekeeping. If you put your phones on silent please, and if you take note of the exits in the event of an emergency, up the steps you entered into and away to the left and through the door here to the right hand side, and run like video, break the world speed record, follow an there, our leader. Now, as I said, you're all very welcome tonight. I'd ask you that if you have any questions, if you hold them on to the end. What I'll do, I'll introduce Cormac here. He's only a young fella. Give him a chance, give him his big break here tonight, okay?
This place was largely destroyed in the 1916 Rising, and a huge amount of their photographic collection was destroyed with it. And what remains, about 40,000 images on glass plates. Their carte de visite collection, which I'll be telling you about in a moment, was gone. But the main man who did all of the photography for them was this man here, Robert French, a gifted photographer because he had a great eye. But it was mostly scenes that he took, because an awful lot of the photographs would have been sent abroad, particularly to America, to emigrants who wanted to get a glimpse of the old country. So there are far more places than people in the likes of the Lawrence collection. Now you also have these collections of photographs that were done by very rich people, like this lady here. Now her collection is in the National Library. Lady Clonrock, Augusta Dillon. She left a huge collection behind her which are now in the library, but there's an awful lot of this sort of stuff in it. They photograph themselves and their own type of people. You don't see very many photographs in these private collections of carpenters hanging doors, or brickies laying bricks, or fellas plastering walls. You see an odd snapshot of a fella shoeing a horse maybe, but they're mostly of their own sort. That's it. But I'm not sure where this was, but these were actually stone breakers. And I think it may be from the Clonrock collection, I don't know, but you don't really see many photographs of the peasantry as they were known. But I think this typifies the sort of ridiculous sort of clothing that the poorer people wore. Some say they were the hand-me-downs from the gentry from a previous generation. But it must have been the most impractical clothing to be wearing in building or agriculture. A frock coat with tails, knee breeches and a big tall hat. But you'll frequently see illustrations of Irish fellas at fairs and all wearing that sort of clothing. The other sort of photographs, if you like to call them that, were called daguerreotypes. Now the problem with these were that you only got a one-off thing, whereas with a photograph you got a negative and you could repeat the thing several times, you could print off it many times. With a daguerreotype you only got one image. There was simultaneous development in photography in various places by various people, and these originated in France, where another branch of negative photography, chemical photography, originated. And that's why these are so rare. If you own that one today at the Duke of Wellington, now it'll be worth quite a lot of money, and they're great collector's items, but you only got a one-off go of them, and they're very, very sharp and very clear, and they're printed on copper, or they're developed on copper rather. This was originally a daguerreotype of Daniel O'Connell, taken at the time he was in the Richmond Bridewell, when he was in jail in 1843. And what they used to do was, somebody would get the daguerreotype and take a lithograph from it. Now essentially that's just a drawing, although it's almost of photographic quality. But that then could be sold or passed around, whereas you couldn't do that with the daguerreotype. That's an etching of the Richmond Bridewell that O'Connell and several of his repeal movement friends were in. They had been tried for sedition and given fines and prison sentences, and they were in the Richmond Bridewell for considerable, well, for several months at any rate. But in actual fact, the Richmond Bridewell is essentially still there. It was converted into the Wellington Barracks, and it's essentially still just the same building. It's now became Griffith Barracks and then Griffith College. It was known back in the 19th century as the Cease to Do Evil, because over the portico there was a sign that says, "Cease to do evil, learn to do good," or "learn to do well." It's a biblical quotation. It was up around, you see illustrations of it. There's no actual photographs of the inscription. But recently, another set of daguerreotypes that were taken in the Richmond Bridewell became available. I think they're in the National Library, and they remained hidden for a long time. Now, unfortunately, the worst of them is this one of Daniel O'Connell, because it either seems to have just degenerated, or it was damaged. it's hard to say. But I think you can get a reasonable idea of what O'Connell looked like from that. It's a dreadful pity that it hasn't survived in better condition. He's wearing one of these. These were called Liberty caps or repeal caps, and a lot of the repeal movement people wore them. Green velvet with gold shamrocks on it, and that one's in the National Museum. That's Charles Gavin Duffy, the only photographic image of him who was in jail with O'Connell. And Matthew Ray, who was the secretary of the repeal movement. You can see his signature on a lot of repeal documents. And this man here, now I wrote an extensive paper about this man because he was an extremely interesting character called Thomas Steele. He was O'Connell's right-hand man. He was known as the head pacificator for Ireland, and it was a very important job that he had because the potential for violence during this time was enormous, and O'Connell could see that it was never going to get anywhere. They couldn't take the British on militarily. So it had to be done by political means. And Steele had the job of going around trying to pacify the country, persuading people not to get involved in violence of any sort. He was mad as a brush. He was known as Mad Steele. But what interested me in him and what got me onto him in the first place was that he was also an engineer and a man who designed diving equipment. And he dived with some of the early the helmet divers called the Deans, who invented the diving helmet here. And he dived with them off Portsmouth when they discovered the wreck of the Mary Rose in the 1830s. And they recovered certain artefacts which are still in the museum. There were more of these recovered in the 80s when the vessel was raised. These are guns from the Mary Rose. Also in jail with them was John Gray, who was the owner of the Freeman's Journal. He was in jail with O'Connell and the rest. But I think that's actually a photograph and not a daguerreotype from a later period. That's a statue of Sir John Gray. That's in O'Connell Street. A very fine sculptor it is as well. And I'll be showing you a photograph of the man who did that, Thomas Farrell, later on. You can get a picture, an idea of the tram lines there. We'll be seeing a good bit more of those in what was then Sackville Street. The man that brought the Varsity water to Dublin was responsible for bringing the water from Roundwood as far as Dublin for the citizens. Just speaking of jails, I just came across this. This is a photograph of the front of Newgate Jail. And that's the gallows that they used to hang people from in public. That bit there. You can actually see the trapdoors that fall down. And there were two Newgate jails, of course. One was up near High Street, and that was knocked down, and the one in question is the one that was over beside Green Street Courthouse, where the statue is today. I just thought I'd show you that because it's so bizarrely interesting. But another type of photography that was in existence, and they're probably the best images of Ireland in the 19th century that are actually around because they're extremely sharp, were these stereographs. There was a double lens on it and it took a double image. And when you looked at it through a stereographic viewer, you see things in 3 dimension. Now, I brought one with me tonight, there's one there. And I brought a few stereographic images, you can look at them later on. A few Dublin ones. But that was actually invented in the 1850s. And it was, as far as I know, it was invented in America. And it was a huge amount of stereographic images taken in the late 1850s and in the 1860s. And a lot of those were in existence, and they were taken for the very reason that I mentioned about the Lawrence collection. They were a commercial venture. There were sets of them sold in America, mostly to immigrants, because there was huge emigration from here after the famine, during the famine years and after the famine. And they were very, very popular in America. And you can buy, they're very collectible now, you can buy whole sets of them. That's the stereograph, you can have a look at. But this is the sort of image that they produced. Now I can actually look at those without the stereograph, and after a while you kind of go a bit cross-eyed and the image appears in 3D. But you can do the same with the tiles on the wall in the bathroom sometimes. But a lot of people can't do that. But the other type of photographs then that were available to the public were these cartographs that were produced professionally. Now they were produced by the million, by the likes of the Lawrences and various other photographers that were around Dublin. And you generally didn't get people's names on them, except that you happened to be somebody notable, like this one of Oscar Wilde. It literally means just visiting card, and you can buy them by the dozen or by the 100, give them out to your friends or whatever. And all of the cartographs in the Lawrence collection were destroyed, but there's still a great many of them around, and nobody knows who the hell anybody is on them. You know, that's just one of my great-great-grandfather, who was an inspector in the DMP out in Blackrock, Thomas Lowth. He lived in Blackrock also. A very early photograph, just thought I'd show you, of Thomas Moore, the poet, taken in the early 1840s. I have another one of him, but I don't have it in this, with his family. He was a very small, diminutive little man. And there's a good friend of mine who was a photographic historian, the late Eddie Chandler, who wrote a very fine book about photographic history in Ireland. And Eddie discovered this photograph of Thomas Davis, it and another one, the only known photographic images of Thomas Davis, who died in the 1840s. But photography came into the realm of the common man then with the invention of the box brownie. And my dear aunt kindly left me hers in our will. That's all she left me. And I have it at home. I meant to bring it with me tonight. But all you got from those were little snapshots, small little snapshots like this, and they weren't of very high quality. But nevertheless, it meant that you could now take your own photographs. But the man that's accredited with a lot of the photography as we know today was this man here, William Henry Fox Talbot. Now, he wasn't just a photographer, he was a polymath, a great astronomer, and he was a mathematician, an engineer, and a whole lot of things. Now, he had relatives in Ireland. I think they were the Talbots of Malahide. And he reputedly took photographs here in the 1830s, and that's supposed to be the earliest one that he ever took in Ireland. And by definition, it's probably the earliest photograph took in Ireland of the quays. And you can see it's not very clear, but you can see the customs house there and some very, very old-fashioned looking sailing ships against the wall. There was even a bit of graffiti back in the 1830s on the wall here. Fellas sitting down along the wall there. But that's by far and away my own favourite photograph of Dublin, because I think it defines what Dublin is, Dublin as a port. Dublin as a city, I think, owes its existence to Dublin as a port from Viking times and before. Going right back, and like you couldn't get any nearer to the heart of the city than that, when the ships could come right up to the Carlisle Bridge, which is now O'Connell Bridge, and Sackville Street. And you can see here a forest of masts going away down the quay, and a fully laden brigantine coming in. Now all of those were probably mostly carrying coal, but by the same token they would have been carrying all of the other goods and chattels of everyday commerce. Somebody has described them as the juggernaut lorries of their day. But they say money makes the world go round, but what made the world go round in the 19th century was this stuff here, because you needed it for cooking, for heating, and for lighting, because they got the gas for the gas lights from it as well. And a huge amount of the traffic, there was millions of tons of coal came into the country during the 19th century. This is a fine photograph. Now it's later than the Fox Talbot one, but it typifies the way coal was brought in. They actually used the rigging, they used the yards of the ships to trim them inboard over the quay wall, and they used the ship's rigging to haul the sacks of coal. It was probably bagged down in the hold and load them directly onto carts. But you can see something very interesting going on in this over on the left-hand side there. The guy here having a kip on a pile of coal sacks. And there's a horse here with his nose in the nose bag there. There's quite a few photographs taken this angle. A street urchin in his bare feet with the arse out of his trousers. There's actually three ships here. There's a wooden schooner in the foreground, an iron vessel outside that, and another one on the far side of the quay there. But that will give you an idea, again, of the whole thing about coal. You could actually rent, if you were a shipper, you could rent a portion of the Campshire. This part of the quay wall is called the Campshire. And you could rent a portion of the Campshire, discharge the coal straight onto it, and it would be loaded, weighed out then into bags or onto carts for the carters to go around selling. And you can see that happening here. You have a cartload of sacks here, you have all kinds of stuff here like steel yards and weighing scales, and a shelter over there which was undoubtedly for the gotchi, the watchman, who would have to keep an eye on the coal at night time to stop people from robbing it. But you can see there that the swing bridge that we'll talk about now in a minute, Butt Bridge, has been built at that stage, and O'Connell Bridge is now in existence rather than the Carlisle Bridge. Just have a look at this building here, because I'll be talking about that later on, the one on the corner there beside the Corn Exchange. That has to do with O'Connell also. But now, even in my time, when I was a kid, this is the way they used to discharge the coal. Now they do it with big mechanical grabs. But it was nothing to walk down the quay, John Rogerson's quay, and you could look into the hold of ships and see fellas filling these big iron buckets full of coal when you were a kid, and then they'd be lifted up and tipped into a lurry like that. We're just pulling a catch, they'd be upended into a lurry. Just put that in there because I bet you there's nobody here ever did that. Scutting on a coal lurry. But I'll just move on. I mentioned O'Connell Bridge now, and we just concentrate on that for a minute, because as the century wore on and as traffic increased, the port got bigger and the berthage in the port was improved. A huge amount more traffic, which was horse traffic solely, and was found that the Carlisle Bridge was too narrow. It was a narrow humpback bridge, whereas O'Connell Street or Sackville Street was reputedly one of the widest streets in Europe. So it was decided to build a wider bridge, and a competition was launched for the design, with none of which were suitable. So this was the port engineer, a genius called Bindon Blood Stoney, who had been responsible for all the deep berthage that was built in the port on a prefabricated basis. He just went ahead and designed it himself. Just before that, it was felt the need was to open up the traffic of the city up towards the North Circular Road, and the swing bridge, which predates the present Butt Bridge, was built. Now, there was controversy over it when it was built, because it was to have been called the Beresford Bridge, but nationalist councillors in the city weren't having that, because Beresford was associated with the 1798 rebellion and the tortures that had taken place in his riding school over in Marlborough Street. So it wasn't deemed suitable to name a bridge after somebody like that, and they wanted the name Butt Bridge, which it became known as, but there was never any official naming of this bridge. It was always Butt Bridge to Dubliners, as the present one is. But it still allowed, it swung and it allowed ships to go up to the upper part there, towards the Carlisle Bridge. And that's a photograph of it being built. The only stop to present day HSE there is a notice on it saying danger. But you can see there that the ships are still coming up there almost to that. And that's a photograph of the Butt Bridge on the day that it was opened. It was operated by steam, and I think the steam engine was somewhere over here in a hut, and it was able to swivel. Amazingly, there's not one woman in this picture. The guy's day out it was. But that's a very, very early photograph now of Sackville Street and the entry onto the Carlisle Bridge. And you can see there how wide the street is and how it's getting much narrower here as it approaches the bridge. And that's part of an earlier stereographic view of the same street there. You can see a good lot of traffic there moving on it. It always amazes me to look at the types and the amount and the variety of vehicles that there were around then. And a fella on horseback as well, very unusual to see that. But that's a photograph of the Carlisle Bridge as it was before it was knocked, before Bindon Blood Stoney replaced it with the present bridge. That's the ballast office there. That was the headquarters of the Dublin Port and Docks Board. And that item up there, you see the round ball here? That was the time ball. Now, that was dropped at 1 o'clock every day. It was raised up, and at precisely 1 o'clock it dropped to give mariners in the port a chance to check their chronometers. It was controlled from Dunsink Observatory by an electric clock. And I wrote a paper about the man who invented the clocks and who installed the time ball. I'll be mentioning him briefly just later on, I think. Or well, I know I won't. But his name was George Prescott. Amazing character. I'll give a talk about him some night. But the clocks are still to be seen in the Engineering Museum in Trinity. That's it looking at the Carlisle Bridge from the opposite direction. That'll be taken from up on top of Kelly's, the gunpowder office. And you can see the statue of William Smith O'Brien in the centre of the roadway there.